So it all starts in 1925. The state of Tennessee passed a law making it illegal to teach evolution in a public school. On July 10th, 1925, so you can see it happened right after the law was passed, someone challenged the law. And it was a high school teacher named John Thomas Scopes, so there's where the Scopes come from, put on trial for teaching evolution in a town of Dayton, Tennessee, which had a population of 2,000. We should mention that this was a misdemeanor and the fine was $100. So why did this trial become such a national sensation? Well, it became a national sensation because two very prominent lawyers were on opposite sides, and it really became a battle between fundamentalism and social gospel and secular humanism. Ultimately was found guilty of a misdemeanor and he was fined $100. So as far as the result of the trial, the fundamentalist won. He was found guilty. The 8-day trial, can you imagine? This trial took 8 days. 8 days.
It wouldn't even have gotten it started in today's time limit.
Had a much greater impact symbolically as it became a battle between a well-known fundamentalist and a well-known agnostic. And just to show that sometimes the lines were a little different back then, the well-known fundamentalist was not a Republican, was not a conservative politician. It was the well-known progressive, liberal, democratic presidential candidate named William Jennings Bryan. And I'll give you a moment to admire the copyright-free photo of him.
Ooh, ah.
Clarence Darrow, and there's a picture of him. I mean, he was older than Jennings at the time. He was an agnostic, not necessarily an atheist, but definitely an agnostic, but definitely antagonistic towards fundamentalists, as we will get to in a moment. So the stage is set. You have two very differing interpretations of the Bible. You have two superstar prosecutor and defense attorney, very well known. One of them is a presidential candidate. The other is a famous attorney. And the stage is set. But the fireworks don't start until Clarence Darrow wants to put William Jennings Bryan on the stand. Now, it is not normal in a trial that the defense lawyer puts the prosecutor on the stand. So in order for this to happen, it had to be approved both by William Jennings Bryan and by the judge. And both of them said about things like, how old do you think the earth is? Was the earth created in 6 days, or did it take longer? Is the story of Jonah and the whale, should we take that literally or should we take that symbolically? Where did Cain's wife come? The nature of the serpent in the book of Genesis. So, was this just a snake, or was it? Do you believe it was Satan? So Clarence Darrow asked him about all these things, and it was very clear that William Jennings Bryan and Clarence Darrow did not like each other. Darrow says, you claim that everything in the Bible should be literally interpreted. Now we're getting to the heart of the difference between fundamentalism and social gospel and secular humanism. I believe everything in the Bible should be accepted as it is given there. But that being the case, some of the Bible is given illustratively. For instance, you're the salt of the earth. I would not insist that man was actually salt, or that he had the flesh of salt, but it is used in the sense of salt as saving God's people.
Good answer.
This could have been an answer that John Calvin or Martin Luther gave. I mean, that's really a good answer. But when you read that Jonah swallowed the whale, or that the whale swallowed Jonah, excuse me please, how do you literally interpret that? When I read that a big fish swallowed Jonah, it does not say whale. That is my recollection of it. A big fish, and I believe it, and I believe in a God who can make a whale and can make a man and can make both what he pleases. That's a good answer too. That answer could have been given by Martin Luther also, because Luther kind of said the same thing. It wasn't as big of an issue in the 1500s, but Luther would be asked, well, do you take the book of Genesis literally and all that? And he said, well, you know, some of that stuff sounds like it could be stories to me, but on the other hand, if we really believe in an omnipotent God that can do anything, well, I guess he could do that. And he could send a flood, and I mean, if he's really omnipotent, sure he could do that. But Luther always added to that, and I use this also, is it is not essential to my belief in salvation. In other words, the essential message of Christianity is salvation through Jesus Christ. It is not whether you believe that the whale swallowed Jonah. But both sides represented large swaths of the belief systems in the country at the time. Oh, and by the way, both sides represent large swaths of the belief systems of the country today. Both sides couldn't understand how the other side could hold the beliefs that they did. And that is very rarely presented when the press discusses this, or when there are referred to fundamentalists as ignoramuses.
I love those.
The liberal side of Protestantism, so i.e. the mainstream northern denominations, assumed that in time, as science proved conservative Christianity to be wrong, that more and more Christians would become liberals. And here we're talking about theology, not Democrats and Republicans. Remember, William Jennings Bryan was as Democrat as you can possibly be. He ran for president as a Democrat 3 times. So that was their assumption that, well, you know, as more and more knowledge and science becomes known, you know, eventually there won't be any more conservative Christians or fundamentalists, because it'll obviously be proved wrong. How did that work out for them? Was that a correct assumption? There's more fundamentalists today, thanks to the Pentecostal movement, than there was back then. So they thought it was amusing that there were Christians in 1925 that thought the world was only 6,000 years old. Now, I should say here that not all fundamentalists believe the world is 6,000 years old. Fundamentalists were astonished that liberals could believe in an unproven philosophy that viewed ultimately that humans had evolved spontaneously from some sort of primordial ooze. So the way this has always been presented in colleges and in the press is that it was this great defeat for fundamentalists. The fundamentalists had been embarrassed, they'd been proven wrong, and obviously fundamentalism was just going to dry up and die because they had been so completely destroyed as a result of this trial. In reality, that's not what happened at all. In reality, what happened is the fundamentalists went underground. So what the fundamentalists got out of that is we need to withdraw more from society. We need to stay out of politics. We need to stay out of kind of the societal arguments about things. And we need to just concentrate on our relationship with God. And we need to pull ourselves away from broader society. Well, the secular humanists and the social gospel people interpreted that the fundamentalists had died out, essentially, because the fundamentalists had pulled out of the public square of ideas, if you will.
They were just keeping their mouth shut.
But they were just keeping their mouth shut. And they completely stayed out of politics. And they stayed out of politics. This was 1925. They stayed out of politics for 51 years. But when they returned in 1976,
Jimmy Carter.
and they all voted for Ronald Reagan in the primaries. And then in 1980 and 1984, when Ronald Reagan won 2 landslides, it was primarily all those fundamentalists who had gone underground because of the Scopes monkey trial decided, you know, maybe we should get back into politics after all. So the story that you would hear on a college campus of the results of the Scopes monkey trial, I think, is balderdash. I think it's completely wrong. It completely misreads what really happened. So this last bullet is when I said they went underground for at least 30 years, but maybe 50 years. Well, I explained the 50 years one with Ronald Reagan. The 30 years one is when Billy Graham was an up-and-coming evangelical preacher. At the beginning anyway, in the early 50s, a lot of his initial support came from fundamentalists. In time, there was a schism between the two, and they went their separate ways. But there was a period of time where his initial support came from fundamentalists.